Oh, okay. That makes sense. Okay, because I was worried. I was like, wait, what?
Unmute, and then you are ready. Do I have to put this on? You go. You can hold it. Okay. Pass it around. Whatever you need to do. Are we ready to start? See, we're at 3:02, so I think we're getting ready to get going here. I will put this on. Hopefully that works. We good? That's okay. How's that? Okay. All right. How are you all doing? Good. I know it's a long day, right? It's a long day after a series of long days. So we're so glad to have you here working with us. I'm Pamela Flash from the University of Minnesota, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Stacy Sheriff from Colby College and Crystal Fodry from Moravian University. We're also joined virtually by my colleague, Matt Lusky. And although he is on the program as a presenter, he is not able to be with us here. He will be lively on the chat, I'm sure, and he was hugely helpful in preparing this session. So Matt, if you're out there, hi. And we're also joined by Jess, who is our tech wrangler. And so we're in good hands, as you've already seen, as we reconfabulate things up here. All right, so what we have in mind for the next 75 minutes is a sort of conference genre mashup. We are going to be combining part thinking retreat with part panel presentation with part discussion. And we also have this historic replica from the past called a handout. So you are in the past and the present, you're in a workshop, no, you're in a discussion, no, you're in a thinking retreat, you're in all of these things. In substantial ways, this session will provide a logical step to this morning's panel in which Liz Wardle and Elaine Mayman and Linda Adler-Kastner spoke about and exhorted us to consider inward and outward facing activism in our work as boundary crossers. Our goal in this session is to provide you with a structured opportunity to consider a specific change, whether it's a change of policy, a change of pedagogical practice, a change of conception that you're working with on your local campus. I think in conferences like this, we can tend to think broadly and think in cross-institutional ways or in field-specific ways. What we're going to try to do in this session is locate you within your role, within your institution, to locate a change. And then we're going to be asking you to think about that change in light of three theoretical models, three theoretical change models or tools. So we will be, as we introduce each of these tools or models, the three of us will be drawing on our experience implementing the Writing Enriched Curriculum model, the WAC model, as designed at the University of Minnesota. And if that's an unfamiliar model to you, I encourage you to take a look at our free book, which is posted on the WAC Clearinghouse site. On your handout, it's listed among among the sources in the bibliography. Any of us would be happy to talk with you about that as well. So as an inspiration for this session's focus on change theory and change methods, I found the survey that Teresa Red and I created in advance of the 2021 I.WAC conference hugely inspiring. at that conference, and you might remember that the I.1 conference got canceled a couple times. And during that time, Mike Palmquist had asked Teresa and I to give a plenary address answering the question, what is the current status of WAC? We decided to turn that question to you all, and many of you may remember this, with a pre-conference survey and a live poll within the plenary itself. A decided majority of responses identified interests, issues, and questions related to social and linguistic justice, and more specifically to supporting anti-racist pedagogy practices and policies across institutional curricula. These responses indicated a clarity of vision as to what was needed, what was desired, what was needed, but the how was more complicated. And we got a lot of pointed questions about how in our roles as WAC leaders, as WAC consultants, as WAC administrators, we could go about helping to support these changes or instigate these changes. A specific question really stayed with me that came through that survey that Teresa and I put out before the conference, and that was this. How does WAC become a leader in anti-racist work when our methods are primarily responsive and our programs are not seen as mission critical? So that was part of the germination of my thinking that we should be talking about how to make change methods. And I've been delighted to see how many sessions during this conference already have really been emphasizing change methods. So here's how we plan to go about this. We want to do a kind of a toggle back and forth between us and you. We're going to start by asking you to locate yourselves in a change on your campus, and that's what that handout is about. Those of you who are online, you will get a copy of the handout. We're going to be sending you a link. But we're going to be asking you to identify that change. And then the three of us are going to go through a series of micro talks or short presentations. And we'll be asking you in between these sessions for brief moments to kind of digest these theories in light of your specific change, seeing what sticks to the wall of the question that you're asking or the obstacles that you're encountering, so that at the end you can draw on elements of these three theories, and we'll have a chance to discuss them afterwards. Right? So this is a back and forth situation. So as part of the back before the forth, here's what we would like to ask you to do. You have handouts, they're out there. You can do this online, because Jess is going to put the link to this document in the chat on Whova, and you'll see that it's a forced change document. You're going to have your own to write on. You don't need to make your own copy. And so what we'd like to ask you to do is to just we're just going to take 5 minutes of kind of time for you. This is the thinking retreat part, for you to think about on your campus, what is a change, whether to do with linguistic or social justice, or more broadly, a pedagogical change that you are working actively to support, or you would like to instigate, or you would like to support somebody else in instigating. And then what are some of the obstacles that you have already encountered or that you suspect that you will be encountering? This will set the stage for you for everything that we're talking about. You'll have a chance to share with each other in partnership where you're sitting after you do this. So I'll stop you in about 5 minutes. About 30 seconds. Okay, if you would, turn to somebody you're sitting in front of, behind, beside, and just introduce yourself, your context, and just very briefly, we're just talking about 3 or 4 minutes here. Tell them what change you've identified and what some of the key obstacles are. You'll be chatting with them again. So if you move, you might want to stay there. Your call, Doug. That's great. And those of you on the chat, feel free to just chat in the window. I've abbreviated everything. I think you have about 1 more minute in your pairs. Okay, let's come back. Now you've had a chance to transport yourselves to your context and back here. This emphasis on context setting is really critical to the WAC model that I work in. Really asking people to think within their departmental discourses, within their teaching, within the body of students with whom they are working, what seems relevant. So what you've just done is it's something of a WAC move. And so that, as I said, is really the engine that's going to drive the way that you're going to make use of what we're going to talk about now, because we're going to be going through 3 talks that, as I said, describe some theoretical models. And you're going to be thinking about what aspects of those models, what attributes seem like they might apply or already apply to the change that I'm trying to make. All right. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to start us off, and then we'll move to both Stacy and Crystal. In this first talk, I would like to offer for your consideration the model of community organizing and the role of the WAC leader as community organizer. My thinking here is greatly inspired by Linda Adler-Kastner's activist WPA. And although she titles the book The Activist WPA, Adler-Kastner changes over almost immediately to substituting the word organizer for activist. She does this, she tells us, because organizing includes an explicit reference to deliberate strategic planning and action that sometimes is not included in the broader term of activism. Although Adler-Kastner aims activist WPA at changing dominant narratives and frames related specifically to writing in the first-year writing course, I'm here to make the case that the theories and models of community organizing she outlines apply well to the WAC work, to the aims and the work that you've just been describing to each other in this discussion or on the chat. As you know, WAC work likely takes us outside our disciplinary home contexts, where some of the changes we propose would maybe already be met with a lack of resistance and some immediate buy-in. Instead, off we go to mechanical engineering, to political science, to art history, to nursing. And these travels have inspired a long tradition of using metaphoric, figurative language to describe our roles. Sue McLeod, most notably, has given us a variety of terms to describe our work and our roles. But one that's particularly useful to me is the idea that we are foreigners. And she says, quote, "We are foreigners who can see things with a visitor's eye and can ask questions that no one else can ask." Our outsider status provokes questions related to change-making agency and leadership. In a nutshell, who does what? Is change instigated and led from the inside these populations at the direction of those who are most directly affected, or from outside agitators, from outside consultants? Or should it be a combination, inside out, outside in, back to inside out, toggling back and forth? In the opening chapters of activist WPA, Adler-Kastner spotlights theorists who position themselves on both sides of the inside out, outside in paradigm. If we start first with this idea of change coming from the inside of the community, inside of the department or the institution or the student body, it's kind of a little obstructed, but I think you can see it well enough. The idea here is that the interests and issues are surfaced and cultivated by people who are directly affected by the desired change. And we work through inductive rather than imposed experiences. So we have the idea here that change is best instigated from the inside. Most notably, John Dewey, as a proponent of this approach, has said the required beliefs cannot be hammered in, the needed attitudes cannot be plastered on, which might be an inconvenient truth to some of the instructors with whom we work. Hope isn't a strategy, in other words. Critics of this approach, including scholar and now third-party presidential candidate Cornel West, point out that this approach is sometimes naive at best, that injustice doesn't often fix itself, and that the advocate, the activist, the agitator is essential to provoking action. So on the flip side of this, we have the outside in. Right? So here we think about frameworks and systems that are initiated by individual experts or for communities to make a system work for the profit of the whole. I bring my expertise to you. You'll be better for it. I do this on your behalf. And as a spokesman for this approach, Adler-Kastner quotes journalist Walter Lippmann, who in 1922 talked about the common person who has neither time nor attention nor interest nor the equipment of specific judgment. is on experts working under conditions that are sound, that the daily administrations of society must rest. And although Lippmann's comments presents an exaggerated amplification of an elitist outside-in approach, the idea that change is best instigated and supported by institutional policies, structures, incentives, is not one that's foreign to us in the contexts in which we live. So blending and bridging the two, we have Penn State's Christian Weiser, what Christian Weiser dubs the activist intellectual, those of us who strive to build connections between their intellectual work and specific work within specific sites among particular people. So the kind of back and forth, the bridging. Proposed here then is the idea that knowledge is constructed by collective processes that we integrate and somehow balance or toggle between inside out and outside in oriented activity. So as we as WAC folks might instigate a critique, but it's only as useful as it is taken up by people within the communities who are most directly affected. To help you consider modes for supporting specific changes within your idiosyncratic institutions, the things you just wrote down, we have three kind of sub-models that Linda Adler-Kastner highlights in the activist WPA. And I'd like to move fairly quickly through these three. You'll see that they don't seem completely dissimilar, and really the wise WPA would be choosing among them at different times. But they have separate emphases. And this is where I'm asking you to kind of think about what words emphasize and what ideas seem to apply to the change that you've already indicated. First, we have interest-based organizing, and this is one that really emphasizes inside out. The principle here is that we trust that the wisdom resides within the folks who are most affected by the change. Shared interest, visions, aims, actions, leaders emerge when people get together, right? So the role of the organizer then is to bring them together and to be an active listener to what they're saying and a conduit to their ideas. The organizer doesn't bring the critique and actionable ideas, but hears them, right? In the WEC model, we work with this kind of interest-based organizing when we bring entire faculty groups together. We go into their faculty meeting and we ask them broadly how they describe writing in their field, what they wonder about writing in their field, what's movable about writing in their field, what students struggle with in their field, and what they'd like to do in terms of optimizing instruction within the network of their curriculum. Right? Next, we have value-based organizing. And so this is initially outside in, or it works with some outside in principles. So the idea here is that unless strategies are based in shared values, they won't work. Organizing is predicated on the idea that everyone agrees on values before discussions and actions can take place. So the role of the organizer then is to develop and distribute value-oriented texts or flexible frameworks, which is what we do with WEC, to initiate activity, attract and connect people, and invite others to develop those texts or frames. This was considered kind of the most academic of the three sub-models, really establishing a framework or a text that people can use to guide their activity. In WEC, as those of you who are familiar with the model know, the faculty members with whom we've had the interest-based discussions collectively, with our facilitation, develop what's called a writing plan. And this writing plan goes through a process, an iterative process of implementation, assessment, revision, implementation, assessment. And so these are the collective values as collected within this writing plan. Thirdly, we have issues-based organizing. And so this is the kind of inside out, outside in model. Here, it could be issues that initially draw people together, but the group, through relationships and consensus building, creates a community that can then mobilize to evolving concerns. So the role of the organizer is to bring people together to surface their interests and then to stay with them and to keep the body organized, which is central to almost everything that we do with WEC. We have the writing plans over 7 to 10 years. People are continually together, they evolve, they change, we partner with them. So this is a sustained change in terms of implementing and assessing writing plans. So what all of these three models have in common is investing enormous faith in the power of individuals to identify action-worthy principles and cultivate creative intelligence rather than having us do it for them. All build relationships and alliances by facilitating dialogues, asking authentic questions, listening carefully to answers, and putting people into contact with one another. So although those three have different emphases, these are the moves that they have in common. I want to give you a very brief case study of how this worked in one department. I have many of these I could regale you with as we emerge later at the end of the conference today. But here's one illustrative case study from the Department of Youth Studies, which is the undergraduate program in the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota. Here, the faculty met initially. I went into faculty meetings. I had data to reflect their initial ideas about what writing looked like in this field and what writing abilities students struggled with. I had student stakeholder views on the same questions, and I had professional views on the same questions. So the faculty met to collectively generate a list of relevant writing abilities. And these are just some examples of some of the abilities that the faculty discussed and generated and put into their initial writing plan. They wanted to make sure that students, by the time they got their degrees in youth studies, were able to situate and understand their lived experience in relationship to someone else, such that one can recognize and appreciate what's shared and what's not. Here's what I see, here's the experience I bring to interpreting it, here's how I make sense of it. They wanted to make sure that people, the students in the major, were able to reflect on and analyze their personal biases and assumptions and lenses. And they wanted to make sure that in the work that students were doing out in the field, that they were respectfully capturing the voices of the subjects that were appropriate in ways that evoke empathy and or action in readers. So these were where they went in this was the interest-based and into the value-based. What they said about these values was that they really wanted to see this episode as an effect of their commitment to recruiting a diverse set of students. They see differences related to home language, academic preparation, linguistic pluralism is big. They have a very diverse population there. So then we asked students, or they asked students, as part of implementing their writing plan, they took an evaluation class in their majors. This was an upper division class, primarily seniors, close to graduation, and asked them to assess the department's writing plan. Of the 75 departments and programs that are in the WAC program at the University of Minnesota, this is the first and only department that has asked students to assess its writing plan. So we were delighted at this. I joined the student assessment. They presented their assessment to me. And here are some of their observations. YOST is the abbreviation for youth studies. I think YOST lacks technical writing assignments because we focus so heavily on reports and reflections. Technical writing is important for youth workers in professional positions, especially if we hope to secure program funding for our programs. So here's a student who's taking a pragmatic approach and saying, we want some of this other kind of writing. Here's another student saying, I know that writing is an important skill in my major and in the professional world in general, but I feel like in some of my classes, my professors are a little too liberal in giving out writing assignments that can be tedious and not always useful. So this was really news to the faculty. This is not what they had thought. So this was a disruptive piece of data, or a few pieces of data. So what they've decided to do, and they're in the legacy part of the WAC program, where they've been involved for over 8 years, and now they are renewing their research, and they're going to create a new writing plan. And what they decided was that they're bringing the student co-op, which is an undergraduate group of students, in as stakeholders, equal stakeholders to faculty in generating the writing plan. They will also be assessing it and helping to implement it. But because of this dissonance of assumptions, they thought it was really important to get in discussions with students immediately. So that's an example of a case study example from the University of Minnesota that shows how the WAC model toggles between these community organizing moves. And so I'll just end by saying that as community organizers, if this is the figure that we're using, we realize that relationships and focus on conceptual understanding of writing and writing instruction are at the roots of our actions. In supporting change, we listen carefully, we build alliances, and we use local data to disrupt tacit assumptions. So with that, I ask you to think about all of these different submodels of the community organizing genre. You have them summarized on your handout. Those of you who are online do too. And to just take 3 minutes to circle or underline or highlight words or phrases that seem apt, not just in general, but to the change that you've indicated on your handout. And then thinking about or jotting some notes down about what step, drawing on the 3 organizing models, you might take first, or what have you already taken? I know that there's not always new change going on, and who or what might have been involved in this work. So you can take a stab at jotting down a few words, and then when ready, just turn back to your thinking partner and just say a few things about whether or not this seems resonant with the work that you're doing. And I'll stop you in about 4 minutes. Okay. All right, give you all another minute to chat and then I'll move forward. Like, where do I stand? Okay, and we're using the arrows, right? I was using. Don't ask me why. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, everyone, in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and move on to planning for change through aspirational activity system modeling, or WAC leader as change mediator. So hi, I'm Crystal Fodry from Moravian University.
And my contribution to this panel is to share some big picture planning strategies and tactics that have worked for me as a WAC leader who does my best as often as possible to take a very dialogical, intellectual activist, kind of draw upon some of the language Pamela was using, inside out, outside in approach to supporting progressive change related to the teaching of writing at my institution, where a formal writing-enriched curriculum program used to be supported. But for now, the spirit of WEC remains in other writing program activities. Specifically, I will provide an answer to the question of what are some specific heuristics and practices that WAC programs can utilize to articulate and strategically address change goals. So the images on the screen, and let's see, do they all show up? Great. Are of an activity system model on the left, a collection of conversation bubbles on the right, and two heads in the middle, with one looking toward the activity system model and one toward the conversation. This for me is a visual representation of what I understand to be a productive role for WAC leaders at a post-secondary institution. So WAC leaders are those who mediate change activity from the inside out and from the outside in, from that intellectual activist space that Pamela described earlier, positioning themselves as reflection mediating rhetorical listeners who liaise between, one, folks within a particular academic unit or external group, and their expressed writing related interests, values, and or issues of concern, and two, mediating with the dynamic plans described through the aspirational motives, rules, tools, community, and division of labor determined by members of the academic community promoting a proposed change. I'll go through those terms in a minute. But this approach asks WAC practitioners to rely on a combination of subtle, didactic, data-driven, and overt, inductive, reflective strategies and tactics, often within a writing-enriched curriculum-informed framework to facilitate systems-level planning that can lead to conceptual shifts about writing and writing instruction in relation to justice-oriented exigencies. So WEC practices and infrastructure can be one of the most effective and most sustainable means for this large-scale curricular change. And I know this because I worked within that type of system for 4.5 years before it was defunded at my institution. But it's not always possible to implement or convince the revolving door of academic administrators that it is mission critical for the institution long term. But the approach that I'm describing can be used for WEC, as I described in my chapter with Chris Hassey in the Writing Enriched Curricula Edited collection, but it can also be used in situations where WEC as an official recognized program as I say at Moravian, on indefinite hiatus. But again, it can still be WEC informed. So rhetorical listening is a term many of us may be familiar with. Krista Radcliffe, in her theorization of the concept of rhetorical listening, says that the practice signifies a stance of openness that a person may choose to assume in a cross-cultural exchange. And Heather Bastian, who we heard from earlier this conference, has suggested that the practice of rhetorical listening allows for writing program administrators to hear people's intersecting identifications with writing, their disciplines, and students. As Chris Hassey and I write about in our chapter in the WEC edited collection, we say, quote, we practice rhetorical listening when prompting faculty to reflect in academic units by taking a stance of what Radcliffe calls non-identification, acknowledging the differences among what our motives are as WAC leaders, who we are as writing researchers, and the ideologies and tacit knowledge about writing and student writers that groups of disciplinary faculty bring to the fore. Rhetorical listening provides an imperfect yet logical tactic to navigate unfamiliar yet fascinating cross-disciplinary terrain. And for this practice to work, we are prompting a dialogue housed primarily in the discourse communities of the faculty we have asked to engage in reflective practice, as opposed to our own. The tactic of rhetorical listening is meant to help negotiate troubled identifications in order to facilitate cross-cultural communication about any topic. And this means placing our own disciplinary expertise outside the conversational act as best we can, representing ourselves as curious, active listeners, and ultimately working to table what we believe in order to be as open as possible to the perspectives brought forth by faculty. It also means that we listen methodically, starting from a place where we assume that each faculty member is associated with, but not necessarily representative of, an entire cultural group. which that terminology comes from Ratcliffe, and in this case, cultural group, meaning discipline or academic unit. But because the questions about writing that faculty are being asked to reflect upon in these conversations are also understood to be imbued with certain values, for example, that students should communicate effectively, it is possible to prompt a group of faculty to think about whether and how they might want to address, for example, teaching and assessing the writing of students who bring different linguistic assets or different prior knowledge about writing into their courses. So the other part of the bigger triangle from the earlier slide, activity system modeling. So David Russell defines activity systems, theorized by Jurgo Engström, as the objective-directed interactions among people where one or more of the participants could not by themselves effectively work toward the objective, and which are historically developed, mediated by tools, dialectically structured, and analyzed as a relation of participants and tools. Within writing studies, activity theory, as many of you know, is typically applied as a lens to better understand and pre-existing organization or text, for example, to analyze how a particular genre functions within a discourse community. However, this theory has not as often been applied for purposes of programmatic building, revision, or assessment. However, as Doe et al. Note in Discourse of the Fire Tenders considering contingent faculty through the lens of activity theory, they say, quote, viewing an academic work as an activity system, or viewing academic work as an activity system allows us to explore the intended and unintended outcomes of our work. The manner in which the work is shaped by various contexts, cultural, social, historical, physical, and tools, the division of labor, and the nature of the interactions among individuals and the communities they form. This is, of course, useful for analysis and assessment purposes, but I argue that this heuristic can help provide a framework to help WAC programs and other academic program or community organization, for that matter, to begin to prepare for system-level change once a particular change has been identified as a goal through the act of rhetorical listening. So, to get to my bigger point, so using activity theory, and I'm actually just gonna put all these questions up at the same time so you can just kind of stare at them while I'm talking. So using activity theory as a WAC change goal aspirational planning tool can help WAC leaders determine, based on what has been learned through reflective question posing and rhetorical listening practices, what aspects of the rules, tools, community, labor, and motive need to change and how they need to change, for example, to facilitate greater emphasis on critical language awareness practices, which we've heard about at this conference, digital multimodality, support for multilingual learners, and or the integration of threshold concepts of writing across the curriculum. Lots of different possibilities. It can also serve as a tool to help faculty and staff, I've used it with staff before, within different institutional subcultures to articulate aspirational change motives and the work that needs to be done in order to attain change goals. So on the screen, list of questions that can be changed in their scope, in their wording slightly, and purpose to help facilitate planning for all different sorts of change goals. The one I'll hold in mind for now is actually a goal that was issued to us this morning by Elaine Maiman, Linda Adler-Kastner, and Liz Wardle for national organizations like the Association for Writing Across the Curriculum to engage in more public-facing work. To facilitate deep change about writing at the national and international level. So I'll go through these questions, kind of thinking about it in terms of what I might do as someone who is part of that organization and to facilitate thinking through, not making any kind of personal ideas about what we would do, but how I might, as communication committee chair, think through these questions to lead toward those goals. So motive, you're thinking about the goals, the changes that you want to see happen at your institution, whatever your context that you've been thinking about. But that may be based on insider interest, it might be based on outsider values, and it might be reciprocally developed. The hard word is spelled out. And making the decisions about where the positionality of the motive development and understanding is a really big part of this process. Where is that motive coming from? Is it coming from within the group? So again, as the example of thinking about how a committee that I serve on in a national organization could utilize the members of that group and the members of the larger organization to come up with some type of goal if we decided upon a goal that we had collectively determined to do something that is public intellectually oriented, right? The subject would be the thing that we are changing, which would be determined within the group. Tools, what intellectual and material tools should guide the activity of this aspirational or change? So what theories are guiding the change that we've determined? What material tools, what technologies, what social media might we be using to do something like that? Rules, what policies, conventions, practices like facilitated dialogue, discussion, rhetorical listening, strategic networking to govern the practice of the change need to be established or revised to support the change goal. Community, who should be involved in the activity? How big is the group that's making the choice? Who's in it? Why are you choosing those people? And it might not be you who's choosing. Maybe it's a larger group that's choosing. So thinking about the division of labor, and that's where I kind of get into these more nuanced questions. How should the labor be divided to reach the change goal? Who decides the motive? Who chooses the programmatic or curricular or other components of the activity that needs to be changed? Who decides upon or develops the tools? Who decides upon or develops the rules? Ultimately, who and what will be mediating which aspects of the change and at what points in the process? So then I have a couple of different case studies. I think in the interest of time, I'm only going to share one. And the other one that I have is a little more interesting, I think. So I'm going to skip ahead, but I'll just say for this slide, I used this sort of aspirational activity system modeling to work with groups on my campus to determine some of the aspects of the new general education program. And kind of always coming back to these questions and approaching things from this larger systems level to do that planning. And then this is the one I'm going to share. So this is writing at Moravian. We have a WAC-based first-year writing seminar. And we found out right near the beginning of COVID when there was a lot of social unrest and a lot of things that were going on. People were talking about, people were like mobilizing online and, you know, at our institution wanting to make changes to the ways that the course was being taught. So kind of using data from a survey that I collected from the people who are going to be teaching first year writing, we came up with the motive of wanting to use the equity-oriented feedback and assessment strategies emphasized in faculty development. And then we had an aspirational outcome in the future. We had a group of undergraduate students who produced a study on language diversity at Moravian. So the goal, the long-term goal became, we want to see improvements in the things that the students had found. And then the subject tools, we had a curated reading list. The list was somewhat curated by me as the, as the writing director, but it also had a lot of things that were brought forth by members of the education faculty, our Writing at Moravian faculty committee, students who were writing fellows. We also had podcasts, guest speakers, assignment and rubric design prompts. All of those were tools that helped kind of facilitate the activity, but that were collaboratively determined. That it wasn't just, again, me bringing all these things forward. And then rules, outcome and outcome supporting resources by the WAM committee, university policies determined by our academic standards committee, which we can't get away from, right? So they're definitely part of it. Specific equity supporting and equity obstructing rules that were determined by each faculty member. I can't say that every single faculty member was using equity supporting rules to kind of dictate the things that they were doing in their class, but it's through kind of the iterative assessment of this that we'll be able to, show and determine whether certain things that were happening in the classes are equity supporting or equity obstructing. And then community is just, the group first-year writing faculty, undergraduate writing fellows, the writing studies researchers, brought the DEI office in for consulting, the Writing at Moravian Committee. In Focus is our a program that I do not have time to talk about right now. So ask me about it later, it's great. We have centers of investigation for different social justice issues. And so, yes, go back to your specific, go back to your handout, the specific change that you identified that you committed to supporting on your site. What is the motive for that change? Where does that motive come from? And that is, what role do you imagine yourself and others playing in that change, and why? You take probably, what, 3 minutes on that? Perfect. Thank you so much. That's okay. They're probably thinking on the worksheet, so good handout on the whiteboard. Awesome. We lost it.
Okay, take 30 seconds and just finish your thoughts. Okay, if I can, I'm gonna be that like rude person who's like, stop having such great conversations. And my apologies for doing that. I'm Stacy Sheriff, and I wanted just to sort of continue to, I'm adding the last sort of layer, if you will, to sort of structures, systems, strategies, things to think about. And I'm thinking about this role of WAC leader as disciplinary outsider. So I'm the chair of the writing department at Colby. We have a WAC initiative as well. And I'm going to speak a little bit at the tools level, I think is what I'll call it, rather than something that's sort of systematic. And thinking about this perspective, which, let's see if I can, well, okay. That says WAC leader as disciplinary outsider. And it's a role that probably a lot of you, if you do kind of WAC work in a facilitator way, this is something that you've probably embodied as someone who's working with colleagues who are in disciplines that are outside your own. And so I'm sort of sharing some pieces of an article I wrote for the WAC edited collection that Pamela has mentioned. That begin with a sort of a simple premise, right? That it's surprisingly difficult for faculty members to externalize, adjust, and unpack their own expertise. And that includes us as well. And I'm going to share just a couple answers to think about for sort of why. Why is that the case? And I'll share 3 answers, actually. So the first is this concept of the curse of knowledge, which is a bias in which knowledgeable people are unable to ignore information they hold that others do not. And I take this from an article by Hines in 1999. People sometimes think of Pinker or others with curse of knowledge, but I wanted to kind of go back to the source and think about where is some of this research coming from, which, by the way, is a lot of interesting K-12 research that some of this comes from. And then Hines also built on this idea with the curse of expertise, which is not exactly the same, but it focuses in on what when I read some of this research, I thought, oh, this is faculty. This is me, this is my colleagues, right? So it's when experts have particular issues with underestimating learning needs and of students, for example, and they have a resistance to debiasing techniques. And in case you're not familiar with that, as I was not, debiasing techniques are things that we do, but it's things like you might provide a list of trouble spots for student learning or just for any new novice people, right? And share that with faculty. And so experts are often especially resistant to debiasing techniques, which are meant to help break down this curse of expertise when you don't really realize what you know, how you learned it, that you learned it, things like that. And lastly, a related concept, but from education scholarship and Nathan and Petrosino, who've done some really interesting studies with math educators, for example, this idea of expert blind spots, educators with advanced subject matter knowledge of a scholarly discipline. Again, in my head, I'm hearing faculty, even though this is often being done with teachers in very specific K-12 contexts, right? Who have advanced subject matter knowledge of a scholarly discipline tend to use the powerful organizing principles, formalisms, and methods as guiding principles for students. And you can also just think novices, new learners, conceptual development and instruction. So I found these 3 tools to be useful to me in thinking about working with faculty, and I wanted to share them with you also. And then I'll briefly just talk about some of the ways that I've started to bring this in as a disciplinary outsider when I'm working with departments. And I realized I cannot see what time it is, so I'm gonna be like Gen Z, take my phone, use it as a watch. Okay, there we go. And share with you a little bit about how this applies in one context of Department of Anthropology. So we just started working together this year at my institution. Departments apply to be writing enriched curriculum departments, and we give them a little bit of money and some support through me and through other colleagues, and work with them on this writing plan process. And so this is our first year working together. And I'll just briefly summarize to give you just a little context, right? So the anthropology faculty applied for truly lots of reasons, of course, but partly to address majors, more diverse backgrounds and experiences, improve teaching of research-based writing, to deal with the challenges of the heterogeneous preparation in writing, research, and reading that they were seeing at sort of the beginning of the major and at the capstone level. And I sort of thought, okay, yes, all of these sound familiar, interesting, important. And interestingly enough, the faculty found it startling that I thought these were all familiar, right? Which is just interesting to think about, what discourse communities are we in and what discourse communities are we not in? Shapes a lot of what we think of as new or hard or difficult. Faculty also have specific interest in diversity and inclusive teaching. For some faculty, that's also part of their research, and other faculty it is not. And lastly, this is just kind of where they are. They're working on their first writing plan and their focus in terms of what do they want, what are some small initiatives they want to do next year, where do they want to focus their work, and they're thinking about information literacy for research, citational justice, which is something I shared with them from the 4Cs statement and the Cite Black Women project, and then writing in 200 level classes. So this is, and I'm still saying, okay, focus more, smaller, more, do less, more deeply is, I think, my saying for all things in life now. So that's kind of the context of where they are. Okay, let's see. But I also wanted to talk to them about, and they were talking about this idea of collaboration. So I didn't use the word collaboration in that prior slide, but when they were thinking about sort of what matters with writing, collaboration rated as important to external affiliates, and external affiliates that they surveyed. So these are, in many cases, their own alumni, which was really interesting. These guys had a list of alumni who have gone on to all different kinds of careers. And as you might guess, with an anthropology major, the diversity of what people end up doing is pretty substantial. One does not become just a professional anthropologist and then they're done. That's what you expect, right? So there's a really interesting thing about collaboration that came up in the survey responses from their professional affiliates, and it was mentioned quite a bit. But in the writing survey that we started off with about students, majors, and faculty, most students doubted their ability to co-author texts, which was something that was related to collaboration, and faculty rated students' ability to co-author texts, NA, don't know, or just weak. So of all the characteristics, the one that was sort of most interesting and contradictory was around this. It was the lowest rating from faculty and the lowest kind of self-rating from students. So here's just an example, and hopefully I will voice these just so that you can read it all the way in the back, but I looked at sort of, here's 4 little samples from these external affiliates who are in all kinds of professions. And they said things like, I'm not a boss, I'm a collaborator. I thought that was really interesting, right? Most of the work I do is in PowerPoint and requires a lot of visual storytelling, often collaborating with several different stakeholders. Or recent graduates are unfamiliar with collaborative writing. They're not great at self-editing. They expect us to edit ideas for them. And then lastly, most of my communication is writing in team documents. So this is just a sort of sampling of some of what I mean. And then I'll show you, this is a visual presentation of what I just said, which really stood out to me in that when they were asked a question about considering the writing you do for courses in anthropology, rate your ability to co-author text with 1 or more writers. And faculty were asked that question and students were asked that question. And look at just the interesting, there's just some interesting, right? So 0% strong or satisfactory. Faculty said, they don't know or NA largely. And then if they rated it, it was weak. Right? And students similarly, some students think that they're good, strong, some think they're okay, a quarter of them think they're weak, and more than half of them just don't know. So to me, this is like, wow, what's going on here? This is really interesting, right? And faculty don't really know what they know, and students don't really know what they know, and they're not agreeing either. And so what for me as the disciplinary outsider role I'm trying to play, what was tricky was, how much attention do I want to draw to this? So I raised this and we talked about it, but how much do I want to say, wait, we must talk about this? So I didn't do that because that's not the nature of the process of working with faculty inductively, and they're leading this. But I did start to get a little concerned. I started to sort of think about it a little bit. When it disappeared from one of the characteristics that faculty were revising, they created a list of discipline-specific writing characteristics, and collaborative was on there for a moment, and in the natural revision process, it disappeared. I thought, okay, but I am committed to the long-term process of saying like, okay, so you iterated it out, maybe you can iterate it back in, but if you don't want to, if it's not sort of an authentic thing that makes sense to the field, to your teaching, it's not going to be sustainable anyway. If I just sort of say, you do this, right? So what I think is sort of interesting is it is there in another place, which is that faculty want their majors to approach writing as contributing to a scholarly community. And I'm quoting now from one of their writing abilities. and to acknowledge the intellectual bodies of work on which they build. So remember I said that citational justice they're interested in. So to me, community, collaboration, citational justice, okay, this is like, that's another version of the importance of collaboration. And this is also a group of faculty, I'll just say anecdotally, who when I asked them, so how many of you write collaboratively? They were all like, no, we don't do that. Read a single author pieces. Now, I don't know if any of you are anthropologists, and I looked into this a little bit. Maybe it's not that simple because all fields have subdisciplines and interdisciplines, but I did think that was kind of interesting. Oh, I just totally stole my own point. Sorry. Well, there we go. We'll get to this in a minute. So what I did was I asked heuristic questions. I just gave you an example of one, right? I can work from the outside and say, okay, what do you make of this? The things I just showed you. The high priority affiliates give collaboration plus your own kind of low priority. And the answer, and I'll do this the beginning is sort of a version of answer at the beginning of a conversation, and maybe an answer that came at the end of a conversation or in a later meeting. So in the beginning, it was, oh, they're all business influenced. That's the problem with all the collaborators and why, with all of the external affiliates and why they want collaboration. It's just some kind of business thing. And then upon, a little bit more reflection, moving to sort of saying, well, maybe things have changed in the world, with writing, with technology and collaboration and writing, just changing the nature of writing for everyone everywhere. Okay. I also asked, this is the one I stole from myself a moment ago, right? What role does collaboration and co-authorship play in your writing or research? And at first it was no, we don't do that. And then, interestingly enough, in the same conversation, there was, well, actually so-and-so does, and so, pointed to a colleague. And doesn't this new person also? And then the new person said, well, actually, yeah, all of my research is pretty collaborative, actually. And someone else said, well, I'm in a writing group. And then they realized, oh, yeah, actually, we do this. They don't publish collaboratively very often relative to a lot of other disciplines and for this particular group. But it was really interesting to see that migration happen just as they were talking. So I will also say that the other thing I've done is work from the inside out and consider how faculty expertise might be cursing their knowledge or creating blind spots, right? So bringing those tools back I introduced a couple minutes ago. And I'm now sharing this more overtly with faculty. Instead of just kind of thinking about it as a facilitator, I'm starting to say things like, well, maybe some of this knowledge is tacit. Let's talk about how that can come out more. We all have tacit knowledge. Expertise creates expert blind spots, right? And just sort of sharing some of that. I think, for example, that there are some tacit assumptions about the purpose of collaboration. Only those business people do it for money. That's a gross kind of stereotype of what they were saying, but there was a little of that going on. And the meaning of authorship, which I think there's a tacit assumption of that authors are individuals, and that's the end, right? And that was not an explicit assumption. There's concept of scholarly community doesn't seem to necessarily include students or the classroom, at least while they're talking about community and citation, it's about being just and open about the citational work you're doing. But wait a minute, why isn't the scholarly community, isn't there a possibility of that being in the classroom? So I haven't asked that question yet, but I'm going to be, sort of poking at that a little bit. And then lastly, maybe there's a blind spot around the role of collaboration in their own research, learning, and writing, which, as I said, is something we actually talked about kind of more explicitly. And then this is the question I'm currently sitting on, which is, are these some of the reasons that faculty were missing the connections that they could have made through their own work, right? Between collaboration, co-authorship, inclusive teaching, and diverse classes, right? So these are all things that came from them, but they were dots that were not being connected. And I'm sort of thinking, I wonder if it's some of that cursed expertise knowledge, right? And just practices that people are so used to they don't see. And I invite all of you to tell me what you think about that and tell me if you have thoughts about, well, no, it's something else entirely. So that was the last of my sort of mini story sharing. And as a very last piece, we've got 4 minutes for sort of a little time with this or questions. So what do you think we should do? Just move to questions and be live? Okay, I think that would be great. And And online people, though we can't see you and have no idea who we are, we know you're being attended to and that you are participating. So thank you for doing that. I don't even know where to look to say that. But so rather than sort of turn to yourself, let's just take some questions and I'll just sit down and we can, where's this thing? We can pass this amongst ourselves.
Yes. So what changes are you interested in making, and what do you make of some of the models and things that we've been talking about? What seems relevant to you and what seems to be helpful?
Do you want to have that and we'll use that?
You can, but not be virtual. I'm just gonna take a few and I'll bring it back to you in just a second.
We actually were talking about the problem of motives. That is, we had an idea that we weren't shared. In fact, we're fairly confident was not shared by others. And to me, at least, this curse of knowledge expertise, that starts making some sense. And thanks, Stacy, for that anecdote. I'd be really interested in anybody talking about that the notion of, do you ever go in with, I want this to happen, or is that just anathema to start with? I can elaborate more, but that's the issue.
For me, what I want to have happen is I want them to surface their tacit assumptions about writing and writing instructions so that they can loosen them as concrete and they can be in motion. So that's what that I created the framework that allows them to have the discussion. So I think this moment that we're in right now has made me wonder whether it's naive to think that I'm working towards disruptive justice, working towards linguistic plurality, when I'm being as responsive as I am. But I have learned over the last 20 years of working with the WAC model and continuing to work with these departments, that the ability to make sustained movement and these coalitions and these relationships and this trust within the departments has to do with the inductive methodology that I use and my perpetually bringing data, locally collected data, back to them for their examination. And I really serve as a thinking partner. So are there times when I wish they would say things that they're not saying? Absolutely. But it really seems futile to me for me to plant those. We have this, as you may know, if you've looked at writing plans, in section 5 of the writing plans, they come up with a plan. Here's what we want to do, and here's what it's going to take to do it. Here's the funding that we're going to be requesting. And I'm often pushing back on those. I'm often saying, is that really what you want to do? You want to create a Canvas site with a bunch of writing assignments on it? Is that really going to be what's going to kick this down the road? And so sometimes they say yes. And then I help them assess it and they realize, oh, that was a stupid idea. Like, now let's go on to the next thing. But to me, it's vital that the agency is theirs. I say this is a faculty directed and elective process, and it is. So I have to sit on my hands sometimes. Does that make sense, Doug? Yeah, absolutely. What other questions? Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. It's the same.
So my name is Alexis Hart. I'm at Allegheny College, a small liberal arts college in the northwestern corner of PA. And so, I'm at a very small place, and we actually have a shared, every student at our institution has to do a senior capstone project. And actually, the idea of collaboration is something that, so it's not working within individual disciplines, but trying to work across the institution to think about maybe authorship, in a capstone project doesn't have to be individual, and we can draw on different strengths from, right? And that might actually open the possibility for success for some of our students. So, does it look different in a different kind of context where it's not so much departmentally or, a discipline driven, but something a larger institutional? So I mean, I don't know, Stacey, if you want to talk to that. Thank you.
Hey, I can walk slow. Here you go.
I would thank you. I mean, I think it's a great observation, right? And I haven't yet had the chance to think about how sort of at the all college level, right? Something like that. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. And I've seen that kind of thing happen in our environmental science department, for example, where it's an interesting environmental studies department, excuse me, which is half environmental science, half study, and sort of half policy, half natural lab-based science. But both of those fields are very collaborative. And so it's so interesting to me to see, like, they had no problem with the idea of a collaborative capstone. In fact, when I started working with them, they had one. And what they wanted to talk to me about and sort of keep thinking about was just how to make them more work better, thinking about equitable distribution of the research and the writing. So I just think that's a great idea. I also just think it's fascinating to try to just, I don't know, meet faculty where they are. Like we talk about meeting students where they are, right? And I think that's maybe another way to put it is meeting faculty where they are. And I have found that one secret thing that's good about that is that I have so much to learn and I always learn from faculty. And so if I sit on my hands and just kind of work with what I'm hearing and getting, and of course, I mean, I'm a human. And so of course I have opinions, I do interject, but you know, like I learn something usually and I realize my own blind spots a little bit. And I'm always sort of like secretly like, it was a good thing I didn't say that because I had some things to learn, right? And it's like that. So it actually like helps me in some interesting ways to do that kind of work. I'm sure that's happened to both of you, right? Yeah.
I think we're at.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say, I have some examples of that. Working inductively with an entire group of cross-disciplinary first-year writing seminar faculty that we can talk offline about a little bit. Yeah.
Great. Well, with that, I want to thank you all for being here. It's late in the day, but thank you for your active participation and toggling back and forth with us between the theoretical models and your home contexts. Happy to continue the conversation at any point. Thank you.
That's fine.
I just don't want to.
Thank you both so much. I think like very weird.